Welcome to the Witching Hour, where we tell creepy, cryptid, and frightening tales at 3 a.m. Tonight's first story takes place with a Broward County police officer in a sleepy town called Port St. Lucie, Florida. In Port St. Lucie, Florida, there is a little town-owned park that people go to fish or put their boats into the C-24 canal. In 1973, before the park or any of the houses were built in the area, the serial killer Gerard Schaefer dominated the landscape. This homicidal Broward County ex-policeman, though convicted in 1973 of only 2 mutilation murders, is believed to be responsible for at least 30 more killings. A sadistic beast by nature, Schaefer would lure young women off the roads with help of his badge to do, well, things I can't say here on YouTube. He was fond of killing 2 girls at the same time and did this on numerous occasions. At some point, Schaefer tried killing his victims singly. Doing doubles, later he wrote,
is far more difficult than doing singles. But on the other hand, it also puts one in a position to have twice as much fun. There can be lively discussions about which of the victims will get to be killed first. When you have a pair of teenage bimbos bound hand and foot and ready for a session with the killing knife, neither one of these little devils wants to be the one who goes first. And they don't mind telling you quickly why their best friend should be the one to die.
Schaefer doing all sorts of unimaginable things to 2 19-year-old girls, Colette Goodenough and Barbara Ann Wilcox. He hung them and buried them at the Devil's Tree. Over the next 5 days, after killing the girls, Schaefer returned to the scene and committed. Yeah, pretty gross. Both bodies were missing since January 8th, 1973, and they weren't discovered until 2 fishermen came across a tree with 2 ropes tied around a low branch and bones protruding from the ground in 1977. Ever since, people have reported hearing screaming coming from the woods and hooded figures who chase overly curious thrill seekers, then vanish into an instant. In 1993, 2 boys were chased through the woods by 2 hooded figures who disappeared at the time the boys reached the main road. Later that same year, an exorcism was conducted and a cross was erected by the local diocese. In 1994, the cross was knocked over. When the city built the park, they decided to include nature trails. They made plans to cut down the tree to prevent local Satanists from holding ceremonies near it. When the men came to cut down the tree with their chainsaws malfunctioned. When they brought the manual 2 saw in, the teeth chipped. When they tried the axe head came off the handle. And to this day, the Devil's Tree in Port St. Lucie, Florida, still stands. Our next story takes place on a swampy river. Some say you can still hear the former slaves screaming in the woods. In the little town of Wakula, there is a road that dates back over 100 years known as Bloody Bucket Road. As you travel down this old road, you'll come by Bloody Bucket Bridge, a small bridge across a narrow waterway that locals say have been known to run red with blood. Of course, it's not publicly named Bloody Road on any map, but it is a name that's stuck with the location for decades because of its ominous past. As the story goes, an elderly, now freed slave woman and her husband settled in Waukulla, Florida, right after the Civil War. There, she became a midwife. Some say she did the horrible things she eventually did because she never really got over having her own children taken away from her when she was a slave. It was also rumored that she was slowly losing her mind. Whatever the cause, she began suffocating and killing the babies she delivered, just as they were being born. She would take the babies down to the river where she would bury them along the bank. Then she would walk over to the nearby bridge and dump buckets of baby blood into the water. Now, because nobody could prove she was actually murdering the children and they weren't just stillborn, she was never arrested. Needless to say, after repeated deaths, the locals stopped using her as a midwife. But she was rumored to have killed close to 100 children, and that's what drove her mad. She spent the remainder of her days a mad woman living in the Florida swamps, screaming that she was haunted by the ghosts of the babies. She would sit in her home and listen to the cries of all the children that had perished by her hands. Several times a day, she would walk down the road carrying the bucket to the bridge where she would dump it in the water. And the rumor is that if you go down to the bridge during a full moon and look into the water, you'll see that it runs red with blood. Just be warned that some say you can still hear the cries of the children screaming from the woods. Tonight's last story takes a man's obsession to the next level. Karl Tanzler was a German-born radiology tech at Marine Hospital Service in Key West, Florida. He developed an obsession with a young Cuban-American tuberculosis patient that carried well on after her death. On April 22, 1930, while working at the Marine Hospital in Key West, Tanzler met Maria Elena, a local Cuban-American woman who had been brought to the hospital by her mother for an examination. Tanzler immediately recognized her as the beautiful, dark-haired woman that had been revealed to him in his earlier visions. And by all accounts, Elena was viewed as a local beauty in Key West. Elena was subsequently diagnosed with tuberculosis, a disease typically fatal at that time. Tanzler, with his self-professed medical knowledge, attempted to cure Elena with a variety of treatments, remedies, X-ray, and other medical equipment. Tanzler also showered Elena with gifts of jewelry and clothing, and allegedly professed his love to her, but no evidence has surfaced to show that any of his affection was reciprocated by Elena. Despite Tanzler's best efforts, Elena died of tuberculosis at her parents' home in Key West on October 25, 1931. Tanzler paid for her funeral, and with the permission of her family, he then commissioned the construction of an above-ground mausoleum in the Key West Cemetery, which he visited almost every night. One evening, in April 1933, Tanzler crept through the cemetery where Elena was buried and removed her body from the mausoleum. Carting it through the cemetery after dark on a toy wagon, he transported it to his home. He reportedly said that Elena's spirit would come to him when he would sit by her grave and serenade her corpse with her favorite Spanish song. He also said that she would often tell him to take her from the grave. Tanzler attached the corpse's bones together with piano wire and fitted the face of glass eyes. As the skin of the corpse decomposed, Tanzler replaced it with silk cloth soaked in wax and plaster of Paris. As the hair fell out of Elena's decomposing scalp, Tanzler fashioned a wig from her hair. Then, he filled the corpse's abdominal and chest cavity with rags to keep them in original form, and dressed Elena's remains in stockings, jewelry, and gloves, and then he kept the body on his bed. Tanzler also used copious amounts of perfumes, disinfectants, and preventing agents to mask the odor and forestall the effects of the corpse's decomposition. In October 1940, Elena's sister heard rumors of Tanzler sleeping with the disheartened body of her sister and confronted Tanzler at his home. He was also caught dancing with her corpse in an open front window. Her sister notified the authorities and Tanzler was arrested and detained. Tanzler was psychiatrically examined and found mentally competent to stand trial on the charge of wantonly and maliciously destroying a grave and removing a body without authorization. After a preliminary hearing on October 9, 1940, at the Monroe County Courthouse in Key West, Tanzler was held to answer on the charge, but the case was eventually dropped and he was released as the statute of limitations for the crime had expired. Shortly after the corpse's discovery by authorities, Elena's body was examined by physicians and pathologists and put on public display at the Deans Lopez Funeral Home, where it was viewed by as many as 6,800 people. Elena's body was eventually returned to the Key West Cemetery, where the remains were buried in an unmarked grave in a secret location to prevent further tampering. The facts underlying the case and preliminary hearing drew much interest from the media at the time and created a sensation among the public, both regionally and nationwide. Public mood was generally sympathetic to Tanzler, whom many viewed as an eccentric romantic. Alright guys, that about wraps it up for tonight's episode of The Witching Hour. If you enjoyed this episode, and I really hope that you did because it is our first one, please do us the honor and hit that thumbs up button. It really goes a long way. And please be gentle on us in the comments section. Like I said, this is our very first episode of this type of content, so we are learning and things will get better. I can guarantee you that. So if you want to if you want to follow us along on this adventure, come on over my way and hit that subscribe button, because what else are you doing at 3 o'clock in the morning?